You have to think about it a bit to see what he's saying in that. Oh, here it is. If you read this, anybody here do plants, trees, culture? Do you know anything about grafting?
Very little. I know that basically where I come from, it's a desert, so a lot of times they'll take a hardier plant and graft different parts of the tree, like a fruit tree on top of it, so it'll actually grow.
Okay, did you hear what he said? You take a hardier plant, a wild, vigorous plant, and you graft into it something that is more delicate that's going to give you good fruit. Why? Because it benefits from the hardiness of the wild plant to produce fruit on the cultured thing. Paul is saying here that God did just the opposite. He spent centuries culturing the Jews, and then he inserted the wild Gentiles into it. It should have been the other way around. God did something that is atypical.
I was actually referring to the other slide in chapter 1. Where
Oh, the big long one.
Right.
Okay.
Referring there.
That's the whole text.
Or the next one, which is just the one section there.
Yeah.
So, I got the, I think the chapter, but this is, I'm not following your.
Oh, my argument is that there are no ethical words in the section on sex. Impurity, degrading, and again, if you look at all the other places Paul uses this word, he doesn't have an ethical meaning in it. He means people think badly of it, but it doesn't say it's right or wrong. Unnatural should be atypical. Take unnatural out there. The women exchange their typical intercourse for something that most people don't do. And the men likewise were giving up what people usually do when we're having sex with one another.
Okay, so in your studies, can you give an example of what that is?
Oh, yeah, it's kind of hard. For the men, it's clear. The men, what? Well, the anal sex they shouldn't have been doing because it is forbidden by the Torah. A man shall not lie the lines of a woman. That's easy. So it's pretty clear that's what he's talking about. And that's what's important because by the end of the chapter he says, nothing is unclean. This doesn't matter. The women, it's hard to know what it could be. And that's why some people think that this text forbids lesbianism. St. Augustine, if you know him, he was really uptight about sex. He did not think that referring to lesbianism. Neither did St. John Chrysostom, who was really uptight on sex. He did not think it belonged. What would it be? What could the women have done that would have violated Jewish purity? You see, it has to fit, it has to be some violation. They could have had sex with uncircumcised men, and in Rome, I bet they were. They could have had sex during their menstrual period, and I don't know what other things that the women could have done, but having sex with another woman wouldn't have counted. It didn't fall under the category. It wasn't forbidden.
You made another comment saying, from the time that you originally wrote the book to the new version, that you discovered that idolatry is not a part, which is very strange because it seems that a big piece of Romans, and for instance, Paul was referring to the idolatry that existed in Greco-Roman culture. And so I'm just wondering, where did you find that?
This is the argument. The fundamentalists have an argument against our scholarship, and they're true. They say you people are pulling on anything you can to try to discredit the scriptures. And that has been going on. Some of I can name people who publish stuff I think is absolutely outrageous. You know, it had to do with people who weren't homosexual, who were having sex with men anyway, and that's what was unnatural. That's not, no. It had to do with idolatrous practices only. No, that is not what's at stake. And so in my earlier book, that was the best we had. You shall not lie with the man that's with the woman, because that's what the Babylonians do. And you're not supposed to do what the Babylonians do. Well, that was an attempt to try to understand the text. It was the best scholarship I could find at the time. And Boylan and Saul, the other, Saul, there's two of them, they're on your list. They did this research hunting up this lyings with a woman and found out that clinches it. That's where that thing comes from. It's not that they were doing it in Babylon or that other pagans did it. It was for some reason, 13th floor. What reason? You see, it's hard to say reason. It's not reasonable. It was part of their worldview that men should not penetrate. But they allowed that you could do everything else. And the reason was because Not it was idolatrous, not because the other two tribes, but because we don't do this. It violates our sense of the way things should be. You can see that this is difficult to get. I mean, I'm throwing out to you something that took me years to get my mind around. Sartre said it takes 10 years to get an idea. We don't think. We teach kids in school to memorize. I mean, I can tell you that as a college professor. I mean, our kids can't think. They can't read, let alone think. They don't know what it means to understand. They know what it means to be able to give you the answer back. But to have understood it? So what I'm throwing out to you, worldviews. And unless you've been to another culture or learned another language or spent a lot of time studying some foreign culture, it's hard to see what a worldview means. I gave you the example of translating Spanish into English or English-Spanish. That's one. Or my Catholic background, not eating meat on Friday. There's different places. Or I lived in Europe for a while. Talk to somebody who went to China or to Japan. Let's support one another. Give us the right to go to a hospital where the person I love is sick. I think that makes others. I hope this wasn't too heavy for you. I was packing a whole lot of stuff into a short time. And as I say, I do have handouts that summarize it. And if you read the book, it'll make more sense. Let me just pass some of these back. Other questions about religion, God, ethics? I mean, we've limited specifically to the Bible, which is a very narrow. If you read my book real closely, the Catholic Church can't fault me on it. At the beginning and at the end, I say, I'm not making a judgment on same-sex behaviors. All I'm saying is what the Bible says. There may well be other reasons that it's wrong, but not because of the Bible. And I say anyone who quotes the Bible to condemn same-sex love these days is ignorant. It's an absolutely ignorant thing to be done. It should not be tolerated. How do you respond to it? Well, I hear what you're saying, but the fact of the matter is there's numerous scholars who disagree with you. This is your interpretation. It's not what the Bible says. Use that line. This is your interpretation. It is not what the Bible says. It's not what other people think the Bible says. And diffuse that power of the Bible. It's not the Bible. It's what they're reading into the Bible for whatever reasons. And only God knows the stuff that makes us choose the positions we hold. For whatever reasons, they're holding on to something because they need it. But it's not in the Bible, at least not the way the Bible was intended when it was written.
My question really goes back to the very first slide on the two ways that scriptures are approached. From fundamentalism to the definition of meaning.
Yeah.
The definition of fundamentalism is fairly new, right?
Well, fundamentalism,
So how did it back up, or how did that develop?
Fundamentalism is a reaction to the very thing that I'm presenting this evening.
Yeah.
It first began to emerge at the end of the 1800s. It's called historical critical method. And it started in Germany, and they started reading the text of Homer to try to get a better understanding of ancient Greece. And sure enough, they started applying it to the Bible. And through the beginning of the 20th century, it was applied to the Old Testament. And somewhere maybe in the 30s or 40s, God forbid, they started applying it to the New Testament. And then all the stuff that I mentioned earlier fell out. Did Jesus, there's a chapter in this book, Sex and the Sacred, on Jesus as an example of coming out. And I summarize what this kind of thing would do to Jesus. Did he know that he was God? There's no evidence whatsoever that you can say that. Does that mean he wasn't God? Do you know who you are? Do you see what I'm saying? If you make him a human being, he didn't have to know who he was to be him. And the evidence shows that he didn't want to be called God. Don't be calling me that. You know, get the idea. And it's complicated because the texts are all mixed. But this stuff, the fundamentalists in the early 1920s, I believe it was, got together and said, we have to resist this change that's happening. And they came up with a list of things they said we will hold. God exists, God is the Trinity, Jesus was incarnate, the virgin birth, the scriptures are inerrant. These are the fundamentals that we will not give up on.